Neha, over to you for a starting note. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mekhla. A very good morning, everyone. GHRDC welcomes you to today's webinar titled From Classroom to Courtroom Preparing Lawyers for a Changing World. Thank you, everyone, for taking out time and joining in with us today. We are very delighted to have with us an expert from the law industry for the discussion. On behalf of the GHRDC team, I would like to welcome our speaker in our Industry Speak series, Ms. Medha Srivastava, all our participants and audience watching this live today. GHRDC, as many of you would be aware, is a 27 years old education research firm dedicatedly working in the education sector in the area of ranking, training, mentoring, and research with the very sole aim of working on upgrading the quality of education in various sectors and benchmarking the best of the educational institutions in our country. The law industry is continuously evolving to meet the changing demands of our society today. Today's webinar discussion is dedicated to exploration of how law schools and legal education need to adapt to better equip future lawyers for the complexities and challenges of modern legal practice and what kind of skills and knowledge is needed in today's times when a law aspirant enters the industry. Also, I would request our wonderful attendees as well as viewers on a live session of this webinar to type in any questions you have for our speaker in the chat box. Now, I would like to request our Deputy Director and Ranking Head, Ms. Aradhna Changapoti, to introduce our eminent speaker for today.
Thank you, Neha. Good morning, everyone. I'll now read out the profile of our eminent speaker for today, Ms. Medha Srivastava. Medha is a seasoned transaction lawyer with nearly 18 years of experience in venture capital, private equity, and mergers and acquisitions. She currently serves as General Counsel at HAST, a leading South Korea-based venture capital firm specializing in Web3 and blockchain investments. Before joining HAST in 2022, Medha was a partner at the former Atlas Law Partners, which later merged with Luthra and Luthra Law Offices in 2023. She has also held senior positions at top-tier law firms, including Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas Kochar and Company, and the erstwhile Amarchand Mangaldas. Over the course of her career, Medha has led and executed complex domestic and international transactions across joint ventures, asset and business sales, and venture capital and private equity investments. At HAST, Medha oversees global investment transactions in the fast-evolving cryptocurrency and Web3 sectors, providing strategic legal guidance and actively contributing to the policy advocacy and thought leadership in these emerging industries. Her achievements have been widely recognized. She was named a rising star by Asia Legal Business in 2022 and listed as a recommended lawyer for mergers and acquisitions at Atlas Law Partners by Legal 500 Asia Pacific in 2021. A graduate from London School of Economics and West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Medha is passionate about workplace diversity. She actively champions diversity and inclusion initiatives, spearheading Women in Tech and Diversity in Tech events at Korea Blockchain Week and India Blockchain Week. In her free time, she enjoys reading, music, traveling, and spending quality time with her family. And now I would request our Executive Director, Ms. Mekhla Sinha, to initiate the discussion. Over to you, Mekhla.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aradhna. Once again, a very, very warm welcome, Medha. This particular webinar is being watched by many, many students, faculty, educational institutions, specifically in the law sector, and of course, by parents. And I'm sure the kind of insights, the journey that you will be sharing, the inputs will go a long, long way in guiding these students. Also, the current students of law who are, in a lot of confusion or just, wondering how to really go about their life in law careers, since there's a lot of change that we are seeing now happening. So without any further ado, I will jump into my very first question. Again, like I always repeat in all my webinars, this is one question which we get asked by student community hundreds and hundreds of times, and they don't get tired by this. And so do we, because this we feel is a very pertinent question. So, of course, law schools in general, of course, emphasize a lot on knowledge. They, of course, emphasize a lot on skills like negotiation uh, and various other things. But with the changing time, there's a lot of, change that has come in terms of the skills required for students, specifically in the law industry now. So, my first question to you is what, according to you, are the unique set of skills that law students should be preparing for? Over to you,
Thank
Medha.
thank you, Mekla. Firstly, thank you so much for having me as part of this webinar. I'm very happy to be here. And I think it is evidence of how much the legal fraternity and the education system has evolved that you're hosting these webinars today, because way back when I had graduated, then these were far and few in between, definitely not online at that point. And I think some of these questions plagued us even then. Of course, technology has evolved greatly today, so there is a lot more of what should the law school students know. But even in our time, I think one of the things that we were sort of struggling with, especially when we used to go for internships, was that what are we doing in college that doesn't transition into practice? You go as a first year, second year student, or a third year student to law firms, and then you get kind of stuck as to, suddenly you're asked to. So I recall this during one of my internships. I was suddenly asked to review what a green shoe option was, and I had no idea of where to start the head and tail of this. Thankfully, I had some seniors from college who were working already at the same law firm, so it was easy for me to sort of go to them, get that sort of guidance, and then look at the appropriate books. I think the real world practice of law is very different from academia. So some of the things that students today could look at is developing that sort of you seek mentorships, you attend workshops, you take initiative in learning practical skills. The gap that can be bridged is basically in terms of what is being taught in law schools. And I think things have evolved far better than they were during, when I was studying law. So one of the things that I note from my own law school when I graduated from NUJS was that we were never I entered practice as a corporate lawyer. I started working with Amarchand Mangaldas in 2007. And as part of the corporate team, it was just learning. The first 6 months was spent in understanding what are the laws, what is the FDI policy. So things like the FDI policy, which was so relevant for a transactional lawyer at that point, were not even introduced in law schools. And I think it was 2, 3 years after I had graduated that I found out that NUJS has a course on investment related laws, which is fantastic because that is what you need. Because once you go into practice, of course, you need to know companies law, you need to understand how mergers work, but transactional law is a lot of practice also. It's to understand how contracts work, what do you need to apply. And I think one of the things that is very important for law schools to recognize, which must be implemented, is that a 4 week internship is not going to teach a student too much about how to actually practice law. So you need to have much more prolonged internships. You need to ensure that students intern through court, they intern in law firm, they do some sort of specialized practices also. Just to give an example, today as part of an M&A practice, you will need to understand not just the commercial laws that are going to go into a contract or a deal making that happens, but IP and tax play a equally significant role. Most of the time when we draft contracts, we don't look at, nobody looks at that contract if all things are going well. People start flipping through it when they enter into disputes. And therefore, even for corporate lawyers, that sort of exposure to litigation, to the court process, and how things will actually pan out is very, very important. Which is why a lot of law schools have mandatory internships in courts before you actually move on to law firms. And I think they are very, very critical to understand. In fact, foreign law firms often have this sort of rotational practice systems also. When they get law students fresh out of law schools, they make sure that they spend like, a 6 month period in training in litigation, 6 month period in corporate, 6 month period in IP and or any other specialized practice area. And I feel that this is something that we must start even with internships during law schools also. to give a very detailed exposure to the student to decide what you want to do once you graduate, which area of law you want to practice, and to have a basic understanding of that field of law once you actually start practice.
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah,
please
sorry.
go ahead. Please go ahead. You
Uh,
basically what you're saying are two very important things. One, that the period of exposure to the industry, whether it is in the form of internship or any other project that they're doing, should be much more prolonged. And second, that
yes.
they should be exposed to various facets of law as a career and industry rather than just one area.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing that I feel which is very important, particularly when you start practicing commercial laws, is understanding the business. And I can tell you that this transition is something that I have also observed in myself over the years. So I spent a large part of my career working with law firms, and it is when I went in-house is when when it kind of brought home the fact of how important it is to understand the business of the clients that you're working with, even if, whether as an in-house lawyer, if you're working with a company, then how to understand the business of that company, or how to understand the business of the client as a law firm lawyer or a practicing counsel, because it is only when you have when you understand the core business of your client is how you will be able to give proper legal advice. You'll be able to review contracts in light of how their business transact. You will be able to understand why certain things that may seem on the face of it to be applicable to a certain contract will not work on a practical basis. So something that law school students must also focus on is, if they are already decided this is an area of interest to me, they need to understand how that business operates, not just how the law in that field operates. So just to give you an example, for someone looking to work with banks or financial institutions, needs to know how banks operate. What is the how does the transaction operate? There are very specialized fields of lawyers also today. So even within a bank, there could be a disputes counsel, there will be a product counsel. So the kind of and especially with fintech, the way it is progressing, it is very important to understand how that technology is being applied to financial transactions. And once you understand so another thing that I feel that today students law schools can facilitate is not just internships in law firms, but also collaborations with perhaps technology and business side of programs to see how law can be applied in different commercial as well as technical fields. And once students have that sort of understanding, it will be easier for them to navigate the legal intricacies of that particular field.
Right. That's a wonderful tip. I think what you're talking about is something which is very relevant to our times today because, like we said, technology has become a big part of what we are doing currently, whether it is law or any other sector. Secondly, like you said, that there are varied interests and varied fields and a lot of niche areas that have now come up and super specializations, like you were talking about the banking sector. But I think one of the most important takeaways from this response for me, at least for the students, would be the fact that you said that they need to be very heavily immersed into researching about the
Yeah.
sectors and the companies, which I think is a habit that they will need to sort of inculcate very deeply.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think, it can start way ahead. So for example, if you are assigned, law schools organize, the recruitment committees will organize internships. Now, if you have been placed with a IT company, for example, and just by way of name, I'm saying if you're placed with, say, Infosys, you need to understand what does the Infosys legal department look at. If you're interning with them, what are the kind of contracts that come their way? And going for that internship with that bit of research and understanding will always help you tackle the assignments that you've been given much better. So when you go to intern in a law firm and you're working with their corporate team, um, I know that when at least particularly at Atlas, we always used to ask the interns that, read this law. This is what I want you to learn before I'm going to give you an assignment of research also, because you will at least then be able to pinpoint the questions that I ask you. You will be able to know where to look for the answers. Otherwise, a lot of time will be wasted in doing that. So it's not always also practical to be that well prepared. But if you're applying for corporate internships, if you're applying for disputes internship, you should have some sort of background knowledge of the laws that are at play in those sectors.
Right. And Medha, in terms of skills, like you talked a lot about research, you talked about a lot about super specialization, understanding the sector, having a lot of questions, understanding the law specific to that area, and then doing the research. In terms of specific skills, like we're now looking at a space where emotional intelligence or emotional
Mm.
engagement, mental health, some of these things are now becoming very, very important even in the law industry, or
Sure. Yeah.
connecting with people or having those kind of skills. Is there anything in that category also that you would recommend for students to specifically work on?
So I would say that, Mika, that they have always been important. You know, so it's very important for a lawyer to also have very strong interpersonal skills. You cannot annoy or irritate your clients. But at the same time, I don't think that it is practical or reasonable to expect lawyers um, to accept bad behavior sitting down. If from that perspective, so interpersonal skills, a lot of empathy, emotional regulations, they will all help in building client relationships, relationships at workplace and negotiations and even teamwork. At the end of the day, I feel that there is a lot of teamwork also involved, which requires a lot of emotional intelligence. How do you deal with people? You are not going to meet you will meet difficult people in your work environment, whether it is your own team, senior, juniors, clients, otherwise. So to have that sort of emotional regulation is also equally important. But but I would caveat it strongly by saying that I don't think that anybody should take bad behavior in this process. That is not good for if you're mentally not peaceful at the work that you're doing, you're not going to be able to deliver um, proper work. So I think it is very important to make your ground, have your boundaries set. At the same time, that should not compromise on your efficiency or the deliverables that you have been assigned.
Right, that was a very interesting answer. In fact, we do have certain questions from the students which get posted
Mm.
even before the
Okay.
webinars start. And there is one specific question from a student which is very much related to this area that you've just spoken about. So I'll take it up maybe a bit later once
Yeah.
we are, talking about some of those questions. But this was a very interesting insight. So I hope this will really help students in understanding where to really strike that balance between like you said, emotional regulation, but at the same time not taking in stuff that they should not do. So I think that is something. The other area that you very interestingly spoke about was how the industry and the law sector, the education sector specifically need to come about and make some changes. Like you talked about the internship period to be a bit longer. You talked about some collaborations to happen very actively. Again, here, like I said, a lot of educational law institutions are also watching this webinar. And from you, who is now in the industry for close to 2 decades, this insight would be very, very useful if you could tell what other steps can they do to really align themselves better with the industry. So let's say, for example, you have a graduate who comes from a law school to work for you, and you would want that student to be up to the mark in terms of skill sets, knowledge, and various other things. But let's say if you had one or two tips to give to the educational institutions to work on, what would those be?
So I think one of the things that educational institutions should focus on is getting the right faculty, specialized faculty. It would always no one can take the place of good professors. They really teach you a lot in terms of how to think and how to process any assignment. So for example, during my time in law school, I have two things stand out. We had a professor who used to teach us constitutional law, and he would take us through different sort of case scenarios. So after having taught us through that process of constitutional law and how it developed, how it evolved, what were the case laws before the Supreme Court, often our exam questions were based on parallel scenarios, and it was a learning process in terms of recalling which case law would apply where to argue case on behalf of somebody. So I think that might be better than sort of rote learning process where you are just like reproducing what article 14 says about equality. So when you apply that law in a practical scenario, so one is the teaching format of how law is taught. It's not just about mugging up case laws. It's also about how to apply that case law for an argument that you have to make. Similarly, I had a professor for international trade law who was actually from IIM Calcutta, and he used to come as a guest faculty to our college. So I think one of the things that educational institutions should emphasize about is getting specialized faculty for specialized courses. There are so many courses now, and you can see outside India also universities will have courses on blockchain law. They will have it on AI, and tech law in general. And very often in my experience and interaction, I have noticed that these are being taught by lawyers who have had that extensive practices in this field. So they are able to bring to the students practical application of how these laws will work, because most of it is still evolving. You hear AI regulations have come up to a certain extent in EU. You know that blockchain is and cryptocurrency is still being looked at very warily by the regulators. So these are developing as we speak. And I think in this regard, both the law schools and the students have a fantastic opportunity to be part of this developmental journey by participating in it through educators who can give them that sort of practical knowledge of how this industry works and what kind of law is required, or how the current system of laws can be applied, and also to be part of and also for students to participate as contributors also, that what is needed to regulate certain industries, how can you apply the current laws, and why, if you cannot apply the current laws, what changes are needed. So a lot of practical thinking on the on regulations, lots of practical thinking in terms of applicability of law, which is going to go a long way in both training of the law students, and which will obviously, I think it has multiple advantages. You learn research, you learn practical application. So it is all going to come together to provide a very comprehensive education.
Right. So it's not just about having a moot court in just the campus infrastructure, but really having a very robust system within the institution wherein they are taken through this entire process again and again and again. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to ask you also is that, we see this generation to be very different from the kind that we saw maybe, let's say, 10, 20 years ago. And I'm sure you would be seeing that in your workplace also now. But as a law professional, going through research or going or reading very intensively and spending a lot of time going through various articles, various papers, contracts, documents, is something which is absolutely mandatory. But looking at the generation that we have today, which has a very short span of attention or interest in some of these things, how do you suggest that they really go about it? Because this is a challenge that institutions also face.
No, I think that's a fair point. In fact, I can tell you that in my organization, we have a very, very young team. So I am most likely, if not, I'm probably the eldest in that team, in terms of age, if not experience in the blockchain sector. But I think what is important here is the students today also have the advantages of podcasts, of webinars, of listening in, you know. And while I am old fashioned enough to say that nothing can take replace reading through those law books and your articles, law journals, I think you should make use of all the resources that are available today. There are so many podcasts that happen on different fields of law. There is no dearth of exposure. And the best part is, um, I mean, so many of these journals also are now available free of cost to be accessed on the internet. Take advantage of all of that. So many of these podcasts are available without any subscription fees. You can take advantage of all of that. If again, like while I said that if you do not like reading, I'm not quite sure how to address that point, because I think it is. As a lawyer, you will have to do it throughout your life. Laws develop, laws change. I don't think anything can take the place of actually going through that written word. But there are a lot of other options also that students must exercise. They can listen to the podcast. They can listen, go attend workshops. They can listen to webinars that take place. So take use of take advantage of all the resources that are available today. But at the same time, don't consider these as replacements for the reading that you will have to do as a lawyer.
Right. I think that's a very interesting point because what you're really saying is make the best of both the worlds,
Absolutely.
while the reading aspect cannot be something that's compromised, that is essentially one of the fundamental aspects of law education and of the career. And I'm sure, you would be able to maybe share with students even later about the extensive use of documents, contract reading, and all sorts of things that you guys go through even later on.
And you cannot you I cannot overemphasize that point, because at the end of the day, whether you are a disputes lawyer or you're a commercial transactional lawyer, you have to read the draft that you have prepared, because you have to be absolutely sure that there is nothing in that document that will harm your client at any point of time. You have to be very sure of what you're writing. You have to be very sure of in a contract of what you're agreeing to. And at some level, you should always double check, think, at least in a contract, that how can this be interpreted against my client at some point of time. Because just leaving a couple of words in there, I can assure you, can have far-reaching consequences when things don't work out well between two parties. So look at it from every angle. And some of this, of course, I mean, to be fair, some of this, of course, comes with a lot of experience. You experience that, okay, this did not go down well. Now, how can I address this for my future transactions? This I should have pleaded this in a different way before court. This did not work. What can I do in a similar matter going forward? Now, a lot of this is developed through experience. And therefore, once you, and I would just say that, for all of the law students here, you are going to become professionals at one point of time. You are going to grow senior in the profession. I think what is also required is to often share your experience with others who are coming through, because it helps them learn. It helps them give those tips, share where you may have gone wrong, because that's not I don't think that we should always be ashamed of that. I think we should learn from these mistakes and teach it to the younger generation of lawyers of what they should not be what they should not be compromising on, because of the sort of impact that it can have going forward.
Right. I think the list of skills that you are talking about is of course quite a few to be implemented, but something which cannot be compromised on. So the first thing you said was interpersonal skills are an absolute must. Second, you feel that the habit of reading, researching, and sitting on a particular document or contract and those kind of things has to be something which is a no-brainer and it's absolutely mandatory. And of course, you added that digital resources, whether it's podcasts, webinars, workshops, or anything else that adds in value, is something that they can always take in. And you mentioned a very interesting point about technology being a very important aspect of their entire education process and how
Mhm.
they can kind of work on that aspect as well. Because as we go along, we will be seeing a lot of changes even in that front. So moving on to the third question that we have, when the students really pass out from their education journey, there's a huge transition phase that they actually go through.
Yeah.
And I wanted to take up a question based on that. What would your advice be to students when they're transitioning? Because the first 6 months to a year is really a period of great learning. Like one of the fantastic points you mentioned is that don't be afraid of failure, don't be afraid of making mistakes. In fact, learn from them, make them a source of your own learning. So similarly, what advice would you give to students? Because that is a very vulnerable period of time for most of the students based on your own journey.
So I think one thing that I have found has helped me greatly in my line of work has been to identify the correct mentors. They're very important in your growth as a professional. And these may not, and sometimes will not be your direct bosses because that relationship is very different. But you need to identify within your circle who are these senior professionals who can guide you correctly as you navigate this difficult path. It is indeed very it can be very overwhelming to go as a fresh law graduate either to the court or to a law firm, because you at that point realize that you are the probably the junior most member in that entire system, and everybody here knows. Yeah, and we all get that kind of from time to time we all get that sense of we can all be overwhelmed by it because the real world practice of law is very different. So seek that mentorship, make sure that you have the correct guide. And I'm not quite sure how um, I'm not quite sure how to advise as to who should you seek as a mentor, but I think during your interaction within the profession, you will realize who is giving you the correct sort of advice. And I think that works for every field. It's not just law. So you have a sort of and the other thing that is very important when you enter the profession is um, like any other job, the legal profession can also demand long hours, a lot of attention to detail and resilience. So I think what will help you grow is show dedication and reliability from day one. I think sometimes people are also as lost as when we are working. One of the things that we must recognize is that if you're being given work again and again, it is a it is also an evidence of your capability. Your seniors will give you work and more work because they recognize that you are good enough to manage and carry it out. Otherwise, I think we should all realize that they will find somebody else. Nobody is indispensable in any system. And therefore, if you show your dedication and your reliability, then you will obviously be also recognized and you will get good work in that process. Um, I know the topic of this webinar, and you and I have discussed this, is from law school to courtroom, but from classroom to courtroom. But having worked as a law firm lawyer and now in-house in the corporate sector, I think if you're trying to get into law firms, it's also important to understand how firms operate, how clients are onboarded, and you know, how to learn that sort of skill for understanding the ability to get clients, because that is very important for any law firm lawyer. The more senior you get, that is an expectation from you. So when you start working towards it from a young age, then you know how to go forward with it. And I can tell you that it's a skill, not and one of the way to also get clients is also by your work. It's also by word of mouth. One good client will refer you to the other. So therefore, the first point that I mentioned, develop that reliability, has a very long term impact. It's not just on your boss giving you more work or you being recognized in your organization. The more senior you get, it shows up in the way clients reach out to you. And I know this happens in house. Like, so for example, in my current role, I can tell you that sometimes between in-house lawyers and in our groups, we will ask for reference. And the kind of lawyers whose names get thrown again and again and again because they have built that reputation for themselves. Um, Network relentlessly. whether it is building connection with professions, joining legal associations, engage in as many industry events as possible, because relationships often lead to opportunities. And that is something that you must understand from a young age. And I would also say that one of the skills to have is always adaptability. Things will continue changing, and I don't just mean law of course evolves. From the time that I started practice to today, I can see. So, and I refer again to FDI policy, which used to be our bread and butter for the first 7-8 years of my career, has undergone a massive change from 2007 till today. So I know the sort of, you have to also figure out, um, so there is one is the change in law that you need to, of course you will have to adapt to. The other thing is change in technology. There are so many legal tools that are there these days in terms of case management software, contract management software. um, you have AI models that will chat GPT will produce a contract for you in a minute, you know. But so while you need to learn how to use these tools, I don't think that any of them can take place of the skills and the experience that a human can bring. Because while a chat GPT will give you a basic outline of a contract, you need to build in, like I said, through your own experiences as to what is required to be inputted in those contract. And lastly, I would also like to state that prioritize your well-being, look after your health. Being the profession can be quite stressful, and you need to strategize how to manage that stress, how to maintain your work-life balance, and because I don't think that without a proper balance, you will ever be able to be successful in the long run. People I know of people who have quit after a while because they are not able to take that sort of stress, because it's only been work for them from the beginning. So all of these will go a long way for someone who's entering. I think for someone who's entering the industry, keep these points in mind and work towards them, at different stages of your career.
Very interesting that you spoke about this work-life balance, because this was exactly the question that I was going to ask you next, because that is one of the most asked questions by most of the student community. In fact, not just in law, but when we do our webinars in various other sectors also, students are very concerned about how they'll be able to cope up with this stressful lifestyle and all sorts of things. But yeah, coming back to this particular question that this student has asked, I would like to quote it to you. She has said the legal profession is often associated with long hours and very high pressure. How did you manage work-life balance early in your career? And what advice would you give to law students who are preparing for the demands of this profession? This was a question from her.
um, So I would say that I was lucky to work with somebody in my career very early on who believed in reaching office early and finishing work at a particular hour. I can also say that is not always the case. There will be times when you're putting in a lot more extra hours, but I think unless and until, so one of the ways that I worked with this was, um, to be honest, I had a fantastic support system personally. So I had, even after I had my children, I had family. I was able to manage that sort of thing. I also had a wonderful boss, to be honest, who was very mindful that, not just like his team and he himself needed that sort of work life balance to be able to function efficiently. And it worked for us. We were able to sort of navigate the high pressures of the work. Not to say that there have not been days I've been in office till very, very late also sometimes. And late, I mean crossing midnight. But I think that if day after day you're doing that, there is some problem in either the style of working, or um, maybe the crunch of resources. And I mean human resources, that there's one person doing three people's job. So those are sort of practical issues that will need to be worked upon. They're not always, I mean, and not to dishearten anyone, but they're not always easy to manage, because there are multiple factors involved. So I hope that this student who's asked this question, please be as lucky as me, get the same kind of boss. It will go a long way. But yeah, so unless and until I think you have that sort of balance, you are not going to be able to sustain the profession for a very long time. It is important for your own well-being to be so. Unless I'm physically healthy, I'm not going to be able to show that output in my work. And anyone who does not have that balance, and when I say have that balance, it means that have that balance for the larger part of your career. There will always be a one-off day. Please be prepared for those also. That there will be a day where you will be working longer hours than your normal, and be efficient in your work. I think a lot of time in offices goes in coffee table chats. So one of the ways to get work life balance is to cut down on those, finish your work, and then manage the social part of it after everything is done.
So essentially, what you're speaking of is discipline,
Yeah,
both inside and outside. So and I think one very important point, which I would again like to re-emphasize on, which you spoke about, is physical and mental health. In fact, Medha, whenever we've spoken to our industry leaders and speakers on our webinars, I can't tell you the number of times they've emphasized on this point again and again and again: to be physically fit, to be mentally agile, to be strong, emotionally regulated, like you also mentioned. And these are things that we take for granted, but when we enter the industry, we realize that it can absolutely take a toll on us, and it can have a very bad
absolutely.
effect. And like you said,
And
there have been people who have dropped out also.
yeah, and therefore, you must have that sort of boring as it may sound, you must have that routine. You must incorporate that physical fitness into your lifestyle. You must incorporate time for just meditating, cooling down, because it will go a long way. And of course, a lot of these things don't strike you when you're young. You want to finish office, you want to go, you want to grab a drink with your friends, all of those things. But at some point, you'll need to bring these into your career. There are two more things that I would like to add here is that at some point of time in your life, and especially for women here, when you have your children, when you have, when you want to start a family, I think all of that is also very well manageable. So long as you bring in that sort of discipline to your work, that you're going to go to office, work, finish it, come back home. Um, don't bring work back home. Don't bring your home into the office either. I think both of them, that segregation is very important. I think don't and these days there are so many roles that happen. So for example, my role is remote. I work from home, and I think it took me a while also to sort of put a full stop on my work day after a while. And a lot of us faced this during COVID also, when we were working from home. We would the emails would the phone is with you, your laptop is with you. There is no segregation of work and home. So if you work in a remote role, it is very important for your well-being to also realize that these are my to-dos for the day. I finish it at this hour. And unless something is like, that critical, I am going to put a full stop to my day right now, because this is my time for, for yourself, for your family, for your children, whatever is required. Because unless you draw that line, I have, when I first started my remote role, I realized that I was working and answering emails and responding at all sorts of time till I drew that line for myself that this can be done tomorrow. And there was no pressure from office, honestly. It was just my own inability at that stage to transition into a remote working role, because when you were in office, you would respond, you would come home, and there's a clear segregation. So this is in this day and age where so many roles are growing remote, I think this is also very important consideration to keep in mind.
Very, very important point. Very important point. Because, of course, like you said, during COVID and even after that, a lot of companies, industries have adopted the remote way of working. And like you said, the balance and the discipline has to be maintained even then. But of course, now that we are so connected digitally, and of course we have access to so much of information and accessibility to each other, it makes it easier, while it can also be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. One very interesting question that we've received from another student is actually what I was wanting to ask you in the first place, but I thought let me keep the best for the last, actually. Um, she has actually asked, looking back at your time in law school, what is something you wish you had known or done differently to prepare for life as a practicing lawyer professional?
Wow, that's a That's an interesting one. Um, so I do have an answer to that. I have actually not uh, done many litigation internships. I think at some point of my as a student, I thought that I want to pursue corporate law, and I started focusing on law firm internships, whether that I got. And once I became and this is a realization that happened after attaining some level of seniority on the transactional side also, that these contracts can come into question at any point of time. So you need to understand how the courts work, how the dispute resolution process works. And I think that one of the things that I would, if I could do differently, would be to also do some and also do a very focused litigation internships to understand how high courts and supreme courts function, because that is a learning that I've had as a practicing lawyer more than as I did as a law school student, which is why quite early on I had mentioned that do everything, understand how all of these processes work, so that um, and whether you do disputes or not, or you do contracts or not, is a very different result, but at least you will have some sort of working knowledge of each aspect, because they are more integrated than we think them to be.
Right. Also, a lot of institutions have the concept of law clinics, which are, a kind of CSR activity, as well as practice for students to get exposed to, various situations that the villages nearby or the townships nearby may be facing, and to provide some kind of a solution. Do you think it's a good idea for them to also get involved in some of those things?
I think any practical application of the law is a great idea. And this is irrespective of whether you think in the future you will practice that or not, because and take it seriously. If you're participating in a law clinic, somebody is relying on your legal advice. So take it seriously, do your be prepared for it, do your research properly. It will only help you going forward. I think any at the end of the day, like, any learning cannot be bad.
So basically, what you're saying is that they may be exposed to various things that may not be really coming into play when they get into the industry,
Right.
but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, okay, so let's see that you're providing legal aid to neighboring villages around your college, or close to the city where the college is, and what is it that you're learning out of it? You're learning your research skills, right? Somebody comes to you with a question, you need to know how to answer. You need to do that research under law. So you're only honing your skills here as a process. So I think any event, any sort of forum which helps you practically apply the law to a real life problem is always a good thing.
So basically, all in all, I think this list of stuff that you've talked about today talks a lot about aligning with the industry, whether it is with the community, whether it is with your neighboring villages, whether it is with the litigation or the courtroom, or whichever part they may not be even working with, but really aligning themselves with the professional industry, being a very good listener, being a really good thinker, having a great analytical amount of skills and negotiation skills, of course, but over and above that, being aligned to whatever is happening in the industry, and not really thinking of what is it that I should do just from a career perspective, and what will come into play in my career, but really expose themselves to everything.
So I would put it slightly differently. I think both are important. It is good to have that focus from the beginning that this is what I want to do. But like I said, so for myself, that focus of wanting to be a corporate M&A lawyer should not have detracted me from learning how during as a law student how courts work also. Um, because eventually I had to learn that. So I would say that you should align yourself with the industry, whether it is the community, the courts, the business that you want to get into, and keep your keep your main focus area also as strong. Try and do as much practical work as you can in each of these.
Sure, sure. I think we took a lot of time of yours to ask some of these questions, but the kind of insights that you've shared today are absolutely brilliant. They may be simple, but they are absolutely the fundamentals. And coming from you, who's had such an amazing exposure to the law industry, is going to be a great amount of guidance to the student community who are watching this, to the educational institutions who are watching this. And of course, we also have parents and various industry people who have joined in today watching this webinar. Any parting advice before we wrap up?
Um, I think I've probably said all of this before. Be proactive in learning, develop strong work ethics, network relentlessly, and please do not forget your own well being. It's very important for your long term success in any role.
Yes, yes. You wanted to say something, Veda? You...
Uh, yeah, I just wanted to add one more to that. I think we spoke about it right in the beginning of this webinar. Uh, keep your emotional intelligence, keep your emotional intelligence radar always active. Interpersonal skills go a long way in any profession, more so in a client facing profession like law.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure that these tips will go a long way in guiding our student community. Specifically, these webinars that we organize are very much centric to the philosophy of helping aspiring law students understand what kind of skills they need to work on, what kind of developmental things that they need to work on, because the sector is changing very rapidly, whether it is law or any other sector that we are talking about. Like you said, there are a lot of technology changes. The sector that we now talk about in terms of communication, the whole channel of engagement has changed. We are now very digitally connected. So obviously, the need for students to have a higher set of understanding of these skills is very, very high right now, apart from the human connection, which is being empathetic, which is also having an understanding of, what is our community like, and really being a human being first. So thank you so much once again for all these amazing inputs. I would like Neha to finally wrap up with a thank you note.
I just have a one small suggestion. I think
Please.
for any students who would like to generally talk, reach out, get advice, please feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. Happy to support any decision making that you think that you're getting stuck with.
Very sweet of you. Thank you so much. That will go a long way. You can't imagine how much of a help this will be, and this will be a way for you to also give back to the alma mater. Thank you so much for offering that support. Neha,
Yeah.
over to you.
So this was quite an enriching discussion today, and on behalf of the whole GHRDC team, I would like to express my appreciation and gratitude to all the participants for taking out time to attend this webinar. A very heartfelt thanks to our expert speaker. Her presence has been invaluable and has undoubtedly made this webinar a great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Medha, once again. And we look forward to more such interactions even in the future. And
Yes,
thanks once
absolutely.
again.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.